All right, so welcome to our EM service. We are glad you are here. If we have our main passage, if we can have that up on the screen in a second. We are closing out our unit on creation and covenant. And we are doing our message today, which is titled, Your Name Will Be Israel. Your name will be Israel. Out of Genesis 32. Do we have the passage in the back? Yes, I think it's reading. Okay. All right. So if we can all stand, only 3 slides today, not very many. So here we go. Genesis 32, verse 24, 26. Here's the first one. We're going to read this out loud all together. If you are like me and you don't wear your glasses when you should, it's also in the back, okay, if you need to see it that way. All right? Okay, Genesis 32, verse 24, 26. All together. Ready? Begin. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Last one. Ready to begin? Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury to his hip. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. All right. So I invite you guys to pair up with at least one other person, okay? Find a person, and you're going to ask them this question. You're going to ask them, what were you known for as a child growing up? Okay, so as a child, what was the thing that most people called you? Like your parents or teachers, kind of what were you known as? Whether it was good or not so good, what were you known for? Okay? Ready? Turn to your neighbor and share with them. Ready, set, go. What were you known for? Okay? How did people perceive you as a kid? What did they say about you growing up that you would become or you would do or what you were like? Not what you wished, but what people often said about you. Okay? Okay. Okay. All right. Everyone share? Okay. What was the most, who wants to share if their partner had a really interesting thing to say? Whose partner had a really interesting thing to say? What did Sam say, Jackson? That you were Korean? You are Korean, okay? But that's what you were most known for in your circle of friends and people? Only Asian Canadian class, correct. They probably didn't even get Korean correct, right? That you're Chinese, Japanese. That's it. Yeah, okay. Maybe most of you won't be surprised to hear what I was known for. So what I was known for growing up as a kid. Take a wild guess. Take a wild guess. Okay, so growing up as a kid, between my peers and among my peers, I was known to be just a little bossy and occasionally loud, okay? At parent-teacher conferences, this is what they would often say. They would say, "Your daughter is a natural-born leader. One day she will lead people somewhere. Where she will lead them, we don't know, but she is a natural-born leader." That's the teacher's way of saying, girl is real bossy and real loud, okay? And maybe a little too charismatic for her own good. So that's what I was known for growing up as a kid. And on a not good day, like on a negative day, on a day where like that would kind of get to me, I would think like that was one of my worst traits. I thought that like being loud, being bossy, I was not bossy, I was just correct, okay? But the point being, like I thought that was on a bad day, that was like the worst trait ever. And I really did not like that about myself. And that was like my own complex, you know? And looking back as an adult now, and because I have children, and one of them particularly takes after my personality, and I look at that and I'm like, you know what? That's not a bad quality. It's just young and not shaped and not molded and not matured yet. But this is exactly how God made that person. That's exactly how God made me. He gifted me with these abilities. Now, it's just immature or not grown or not developed yet. And so it bumps into other people, and it doesn't really go very well sometimes. But with maturity, with wisdom, hopefully, I am just less bossy than before, okay? And more of a leader, leading people in the right direction. But as a kid, that was really hard for me. The minute anyone would say, "You're just so," and I knew where it would finish, I hated hearing that. It was the worst thing. But looking at that now, I realize, so much of what God called me to be and made me to be, a lot of experiences in my life quenched that spirit in me. Just like think about you. The thing about you, even most of us growing up who are not majority white or don't look white, right? Like all of us grew up with that minority complex to some degree, that I'm the only Asian in the room or I'm the only person of color in the room. And so I have to hold myself differently. And yet that is the very thing that God has called you to be who you are. Whether it's biracial, Korean, whatever it may be, that's what we're called to be. And yet that's probably the very thing most of us are made fun of for growing up. That's maybe the thing that most of us carried that was a burden for us. The very thing that God calls good and beautiful. And so this idea is really important today because every single one of you, God has a calling on your life. And God has given you giftings and unique talents and unique abilities. Whether you take up a lot of space in the room or not, God has called you to be who you are. And God has a plan and purpose for each and every one of us, no matter our age, no matter what season of life we are in. God has called us to something unique that only we can fulfill in the places that we are at, in our work, in our family, whatever it may be. But oftentimes, the very thing that God has called forth in you, maybe you and I have tried to manipulate to be the way that we want it to be. And so that very thing often becomes our pain point, our complex, the very thing that we work so hard to hide and not be. That very same idea goes for Jacob today in our part 2 of his story today. This is my favorite story in the entire Bible because God has used it a lot to sharpen me, a lot. If I can relate to any character in the Bible, it's Jacob. Any character, it's Jacob. That's the one I can most relate to out of everybody. And so whenever I share about Jacob, it's very tender for me because I know where God has led me through the story and where he still has yet to lead me. And so I invite you to also look at the mirror and see a little bit of Jacob in each and every one of us because there is. I might have a lot of Jacob, but you might have a little bit. But in each and every one of us, we all have a little bit of Jacob in us. And here's how we know. So, last week, right? Third generation, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. Twins. Esau is born first. Jacob is born grabbing his brother's heel as if he wants to be first. And so he is thus named Jacob, which means heel catcher, which also translates to deceiver and tricker. That's what he's known for. Think about, were you ever known as who was known as the class clown growing up? Okay, it's almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like if you're known as the class clown in enough grades, enough years, you hold that complex kind of all throughout your whole school career. And it becomes this thing that you live up to become. It's very strange. If you're a teacher, you see it in every class. Every class, you see the kids that are the smart kids, the nerds, the class clowns, this and that. They literally, you can watch them grow up to fulfill that story. Jacob has lived all of his life living up to his name. He literally lives up to his name. Twice he tricks his brother. And so now here we are. He has to run away from home. He goes away. His mom tells him, "I'll call you back when your brother's anger cools down." 20 years go by, no word from Rebecca, nothing. He also does not know that his favored parent has now passed away. She's dead now. He never got to see her again. So 20 years goes by at his uncle's house, so his mom's brother's house. And Jacob, the deceiver, has met his match in his uncle Laban, because his uncle deceives him even more than Jacob ever could. Okay? Marries the wrong girl, even though that's not what the deal was. He got tricked from that. His wages got changed over and over and over again. Okay, this is a really bad situation. And yet, through it all, God had promised from the beginning, I will be with you. I will be with you. As Jacob is leaving, he has a dream. And in that dream, he says angels going up and down the stairway leading to heaven, showing God is very intimately involved in the affairs of earth, very much cares about his people. And God says, believe me, I will bring you back here. You will not be in need ever. I will be with you. And when that happens, you will know that I am God. And so Jacob goes, okay, God, we got a deal. If you will be with me, provide for me, you'll be my God. 20 years goes by. His family has grown. He has 11 sons. His family has grown. The flock gets too big. They cannot share the land. So now he has to leave. But that also means that Jacob has to go face his greatest fear, the one thing he has not conquered in his life yet, the very thing that caused him to run away. His past now catches up to him. How many of you have friends from 20 years ago? Okay. Some of you are like, I am currently 20. So none, because that was 0, okay? But some of you guys, right, 20 years ago. I have friends from 20 years ago that I grew up with. And a couple of us friends were known kind of as like, I was known as a certain kind of kid, and they were known as a certain kind of kid. And 20 years later, trust me, we've all grown up. We've all matured. We've all done better. But when we get together, it's kind of like our old little kid selves come back together again. It's very strange. Because it's like you kind of go back 20 years ago. Jacob has since grown in those 20 years. He has matured. He has gained some wisdom. He has, through his uncle's deception, learned his lesson, not to deceive so much anymore. He has matured. And yet here he is, 20 years later, going back to face his past, the one thing he has not overcome in his life. And so, here we are in our main passage today. Verse 24. This is the night before he knows he will meet Esau. The night before. And he's left all alone in the camp. Okay? His family is gone. His possession, everything has crossed the river. He has prepared everything he possibly can. If Jacob is type A, like checklist planning, this is him at his finest. He has done everything he can. And now he is left alone. Alone. This is actually very important because alone is different from lonely. Okay? Alone is different from lonely. This is not Jacob being lonely. This is Jacob finally alone. Finally, he has done everything he can. He is at his wit's end. He has nothing he can do, nowhere he can go, no one he can talk to. He has met his limit here, and he is alone. Sometimes you and I need to be truly alone in order to wrestle with God. In order to find breakthrough with God, whatever it is you're struggling with, whatever sin it may be, whatever past it may be, whatever doubts or struggles you're having, the only way to break through is to actually be alone before God. Now, for many of us, that is very difficult to do because we are too busy. We are too distracted. We are never actually alone with our thoughts. We'll do everything we can to not be alone. When you go somewhere and you find yourself waiting in line for something, what do most people do nowadays? We pull out our phones. No one knows how to sit in a waiting room just looking at the wall anymore. We're always on our phones, something. We are never alone. But here we find that for Jacob, he did everything he could. And yet he still had to come face to face with his greatest fears alone. Now, I want to ask you, when was the last time you were really alone before God? Alone. Like truly alone before God. Even I feel like in my devotional time, I turn on music, right? Like, that's not bad. All of those things are really, really good. But silence, solitude before God is definitely a discipline that we don't have as well nowadays in our time. That really actually might help us to break through with God. Now here we see a man came and wrestled with him until dawn began to break. Why wrestling? Why not talking? Like, why not just sitting there? Why wrestling? We're going to soon see this is no ordinary man. This is not just some random man across the street. This is actually God himself. But here we get to our main point, if we can go to the back. The main point is this. Wrestling with God actually helps us to know him and be changed by him. Ironically, wrestling with God is what helps us to actually know him and be changed by him. There's something in the wrestling with God and the back and forth of us trying to get our way, of God showing us, you are not stronger, actually. Us being like, no, I am, and taking it back. There's something in that wrestling that changes us and transforms us. More than just talking, more than just sitting, more than any of those things. There's something in the wrestling that changes us. Going back to our passage, previous slide, we see that what was it that Jacob wanted? He would not let him go. Can you imagine wrestling with someone all night long, how tiring that physically is? Very, very tiring. To the point where Jacob, now, here we see this match was not actually equal the whole time. It's like a father and a son, like a young father and a young son, okay? Because as the years go by, then the son grows stronger. But I remember as a little kid, my dad would arm wrestle with us, right? We're like, 10 years old. There's no way we're going to beat him. But what do all dads do? They're like, they let you win for a while, right? And then they let you win. Maybe they're whatever it is that they have you do. But the point being, it's not actually an equal match. But in that, what is the father doing with the child? He's building relationship. He's actually connecting in a very interesting way. Here, God is wrestling with Jacob all night long. But the minute he touches his hip socket, it's wrenched out permanently. Permanently disabled now, Jacob. And so he asks him, what do you want? Why are you wrestling with me all night? What are you really fearful of? What are you really wanting? What are you really struggling about? In other words, he's saying, Jacob, look back at your life. 20 years ago when you tricked your brother and did all those things, why did you do that? What compelled you to trick your family, deceive your family? What was it that was driving you? Because it wasn't really actually just about the birthright. It wasn't really actually just about the blessing. What was he really after underneath all of that? And that same question applies to all of us today. When you're wrestling with God with something, when there are prayers that have not been answered, when there are things that you are waiting from God for, when there are doubts that you have, ask yourself this same question. What do you really want, actually? What is your question behind the question? Why are you asking for this thing? What is really behind it? And for Jacob, it took wrestling all night for him to realize, hey, it actually wasn't about the birthright. It actually wasn't about double portion money or possessions. It actually wasn't my father's favor. It was actually this, that I wanted to be the one through whom God's blessing would flow. Not Esau, my older brother. That Abrahamic blessing, seed, descendants, land, blessing all over the world, that's what I really wanted. That's what I really, really wanted. Oftentimes, it's in the wrestling with God that we can actually know what we're really, really after. And most of the time, the greatest enemy to our faith is who? Look in the mirror. It's you and I. Most of the time, it's ourselves. We are our worst enemy most of the time. Most of the time, it's us. It's our doubt. It's our own negative self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, it might not have been us that started it, because trust me, I didn't grow up thinking I was bossy. I just thought I was right, But everyone else told me, you're bossy. And then that became ingrained in my head of like, that's just all I'm good for. Like, no one really likes me because X, Y, Z, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like, we have these things ingrained in us, around us, but we begin to fulfill the prophecy ourselves. The greatest enemy to your faith is often yourself. My way or the highway. I want to grow in God, but my way. And my timing with my safety and all the things that I want, right? It's only when we wrestle, it's only when we realize I'm actually not right all the time, or I'm actually not the one that can control all things. I actually can't control anything. That God is truly, truly, not just in my head, greater than me, but greater than me in every way, and I can acknowledge that. Only when I lose before God can I acknowledge that he is truly God. That's when true transformation can begin. So is there any wrestling going on in your life right now? Maybe that wrestling is disguised as a relationship difficulty, waiting on a prayer, struggling financially, not know where to go with your life, your career, your future, everything's a question mark. It might be disguised as all of those things. But let me tell you, it's not actually about your career. It's not actually about waiting for this or that. Most of the time, that's part of it. But most of the time, there's usually something deeper that we're wrestling. And that's what God is shaking. That's what God is after right now. Because only with wrestling can we know him and be changed by him. Let's go next passage, verse 27. So he asks him, what do you want, right? Verse 27. Then the man says, or Jacob responds, I want to be blessed. And the man then says, what is your name? Okay, if Jacob says, I want this, what's the natural response? Sure, here you go. Or, no, I can't give you that. That's the normal response, right? But Jacob responds with, I want to be blessed by you. And the man says, what is your name? And he responds, Jacob. Pause right there. Okay, I want you to imagine. Jacob is not saying, hi, my name is Jacob, nice to meet you. That's not what's going on. What's going on here is Jacob being like, what's your name? The man is reminding him, hey, what do you carry all your life? What has been your burden that you have carried? What has been the self-fulfilling negative prophecy that was looped over your life? That I'm a deceiver. That all I've done, all I'm good for, is to manipulate and get my way. That's all I've done. That's all I'm known for. Jacob is not just saying his name. He's saying, hey, this is my very weakest point. Think about when someone's close to you, okay, your parents, your sibling. You know something about siblings? You know what's weird about them? They know what button to push. My brother, he knows what button to push. Even now, as grown-ups, if we're together for too long, we start pushing those buttons, but we know which buttons to push in each other. You know that person really close to you, your husband, your wife, whoever it may be, they know what button to push. This was his button. This was his tender spot. This was the one thing he was like, this is my complex. This is the very thing that is so tender about me. What is that for you? The thing that when someone says something or something happens, you go off and you can't control your reaction, and it's like almost embarrassing in hindsight. That thing about you or something about you that someone can say and it sets you off. That is the very thing that God was saying, Jacob, That's what I want you to give to me. Because right now, you cannot be the vessel for blessing that you want to be because you're holding on to this Jacob identity. Because you're holding on to this past and this way of being, that you have survived your world in this way. Because you hold on to that, you cannot be the blessing vessel that I've called you to be. And you can't change that. So here we are wrestling so that you can see the only way is surrender. When he said his name, the man responded, "Your name will no longer be Jacob. From now on, you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." Israel means wrestling with God, struggling with God, and God reigning over him. From Jacob comes the 12 sons who would make the 12 tribes of Israel. Out of Jacob, out of all three, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Jacob truly is the most conniving, the most deceptive, the most manipulative. Probably, if you were to compare them all, he's the worst one, you know? But out of him comes the greatest transformation that births truly the promise of God, the nation that God promised. You are no longer Jacob. You will be called Israel. Only God can change his identity. In the exact same way, only God can take our past. Only God can take what you think is the most broken part of you. Only God can take the most tender part of you and transform that, redeem that, restore that, heal that. Only God can do that. But only when God does that can the rest of what God has planned for you begin to unfold. Does that make sense? So at some point, if you have not already wrestled, you will wrestle. You will. And that is for your good. Because in order for God to release the promises and blessings that he has planned over your life, we have to hit that fork in the road. And we have to decide, am I going to wrestle or not? There are probably countless many people who have gotten to that fork and have said, I can't wrestle. I can't do it. I can't let it go. I can't let my past go. I can't let whatever X, Y, Z go. I can't let it go, whatever it is for me. And many who have forfeited the wrestle match. And so my encouragement to you today is if you are in the wrestle, if you are in the struggle, you are actually probably in the right place. It took all night. You know when you're going to sleep and you can't go to sleep? It's the worst. And it's like night feels forever. Night can feel like forever. But what always comes after night? Morning. Always. Always, always. And so in this season of wrestle that you are in, whether you're wrestling with your past, your mistakes, your sin, the identity that was given to you that you don't want, whatever it is that you're wrestling with, do not give up. Do not give up. Because it's in the wrestling that you are transformed. And it's only in the struggle that you can have new identity. So let me ask you, are you struggling? Are you wrestling? Maybe God is allowing those things to refine you. I want to also argue that Jacob, this is the climax, right? This moment of wrestling with God was this climax. But for 20 years leading up to this moment, God has been refining him for 20 years. 20 years with him meeting his match in Laban. 20 years. Who's 20 here? Okay? That's your whole lifetime. Who's more than that? That's half our lifetimes, okay, the rest of us. But not quite halftime yet, almost halftime, okay? But the point being, that's a long time. If you have not wrestled, and it's only been 2.5 weeks, my friend, buckle up, okay? Because the wrestling can feel long. I actually argue the longer the wrestling, it's because the more that God needs to refine in us, but also the greater the calling he has for us, okay? So, in the wrestling, in the 20 years, there will be a point where it will be a transformation. It will be a point of change, but you got to keep going until then. So when we wrestle, we don't look at him and we're like, God, why you do this to us? Of course, we're tempted to say that. But in that, it's because we realize that God wants to transform us like nothing else can. Verse 30, our last passage. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God, for he said, I have seen God face to face. The only way to experience new birth, new life, transformation, healing, restoration, the only way is to see him, to wrestle with him, and to know him. That is the only way. That is the only way. Because most of the time, we're not willing to give up the very thing, that control. He's like, it's not you, it's me. I'm the one that's in control. And until you can acknowledge that, you're going to keep on wrestling. Because I can go all day. I can wrestle all night long. But you got to let that go. Jacob then he said, as the sun was rising, he limped off. And actually, we find out that Jacob, for the rest of his days, had this limp forever. Every morning he woke up after that. Don't you think he remembered that wrestling match? Every day he's like, okay. I cannot rely on myself. I'm not in control. Literally, God wrestled with me and I lost, okay? But I actually won because I learned how to surrender and trust him. And this is my physical reminder every single day that I am called to trust and depend upon him. And when I do that, that is actually the blessing that God has for me. So let me ask you, remember, only in the wrestling can you be changed and know God deeply. If you've been praying the last year, God, help me know you, God, help me know you, and then you're like, why am I wrestling so much? It's because he's answering your prayers, okay? He's answering your prayers. It's only in the wrestling that you can know him and be transformed deeply. Can I have the praise to come up? As you think right now and reflect on your life, it's a good time. We're at the end of the year. It's December 1st today. Look back on this last year. I invite you to think back through this last year, 2024. Some of you are like, I don't remember what I ate yesterday. Okay, but it's okay. Walk with me. Work with me. Think back through this last year. Think of all the things. What are the highlights? What are the milestones that you can think of in this year? What are the ways that God has moved in your life in this year? Where did you start in January? And where are you today? What have you wrestled with? What have you struggled with? Maybe things have not panned out for you this year like you wanted. Maybe things have not been good for you. Maybe it's been better than you expected. Maybe it's been a surprise. Maybe you're further from God than when you started. Maybe you're closer to God than when you started. But wherever you are, today is a new day to come before him and surrender again. Can we all stand? As we sing this last song, I encourage all of us that the greatest thing you can give your life to, the greatest pursuit you could ever have in your life is to know him and be truly known by him. That is the greatest pursuit of your life. When you and I die, most of the people around us will forget about us. In 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years, your impact will be lost. It sounds really cynical, but it's true, okay? But your life has value and meaning. Because when you and I pursue God, when we dare to pursue the almighty, eternal God, knowing him is the greatest pursuit of your life. It is the greatest adventure of your life. And you can never go back to being just Jacob when you've tasted what it's like to be Israel. And so, my friend, in your struggle right now, in your wrestling right now, let's press in and say, God, I will not let you go until you bless me. And that blessing is actually not in the things that I think, but it's actually in knowing you deeply. Let's worship together.